Imagine a cold winter night in Berlin, 1884. The streets are covered in fog, carriages rattling on cobblestones, and inside a grand hall, the lights burn late into the night. But this was no ordinary meeting. Behind closed doors, men in heavy coats and polished boots gathered around a massive map of Africa. Not a single African voice was invited, yet in this room, the destiny of an entire continent was being decided. Borders were not drawn by rivers or by people or by cultures. They were carved with rulers and pens, as if Africa was nothing more than an empty canvas. But why Berlin? Why at that moment in history? And what forces drove Europe to slice apart lands they barely understood? To uncover this, we must step inside that hall and witness how the scramble for Africa truly began. But why Berlin? Why gather in this faraway European city to decide Africa's future? The answer begins with one man, Otto von Bismarck, the powerful chancellor of Germany. At the time, Europe was on the edge of chaos. Every nation wanted a piece of Africa's land and wealth: Britain, France, Portugal, Belgium, Spain. Tensions were rising. Without order, a war in Europe could break out over Africa. So Bismarck offered a solution: invite the major European powers to Berlin to sit at one table and agree on how Africa would be divided. But here's the strange truth. Many of these leaders had never even stepped foot in Africa. They knew Africa not through its people, its kingdoms, or its cultures, but through maps, rumors, and greed. The Berlin Conference became less about Africa itself and more about avoiding fights among Europeans. It was a game of power, drawn on paper, with Africa as the prize. So who came to this secretive gathering? Around the table sat representatives of 14 European powers. Britain, hungry to control the Nile and trade routes. France, desperate to expand its empire. Portugal, clinging to old coastal colonies. Belgium, with King Leopold dreaming of a personal kingdom in the Congo. Even the young United States sent an observer. Yet notice what's missing. No one from Ethiopia. No one from the Ashanti, the Zulu, the Benin, or the Hausa. Africa's rulers, who had governed these lands for centuries, were never asked. The room was full, but Africa's voice was silent. Inside the hall, maps of rivers and coasts were spread out. The deeper interior of Africa, largely blank. That didn't stop them. With ink and rulers, they began sketching borders that ignored kingdoms, cultures, and families. Lines that, even today, still shape Africa's nations. Among all the European powers at Berlin, one man stood out for his ambition: King Leopold II of Belgium. To the world, he spoke of bringing civilization and Christianity to Africa. But behind closed doors, he wanted something else: a private empire, his very own kingdom carved out of the Congo. At Berlin, Leopold played his cards perfectly. He convinced the powers to grant him personal control over a vast region in Central Africa, an area almost 80 times larger than Belgium itself. They called it the Congo Free State, but it was not free. It became one of the greatest human tragedies of the 19th century. The Berlin Conference, in many ways, was not just about drawing lines. It was about opening the door for exploitation on a scale never seen before. What began as ink on paper would soon become chains on people, forced labor, and entire kingdoms ripped apart. Once Leopold opened the door in the Congo, the race was on. The Berlin Conference had given the green light, and suddenly, Africa became a prize every European power wanted to grab. Britain moved quickly. They wanted control of the Nile, a line stretching from Cairo all the way to Cape Town, an empire that would link north to south. France rushed westward, carving up vast territories from Senegal to the Sahara. Portugal tried to secure Angola and Mozambique, hoping to connect them across the continent. Germany, new to empire, staked claims in East Africa and Namibia. On paper, these lines looked neat, but on the ground, they tore through kingdoms and families. A border could cut one ethnic group into two different colonies. A new European claim could erase an African kingdom overnight. It was like drawing walls across living, breathing societies. Walls that many Africans had no idea were being built until soldiers and flags arrived. The Berlin Conference ended in February 1885, after 3 long months of negotiations. But for Africa, the consequences lasted far longer than any of those men in Berlin could have imagined. Entire kingdoms, some centuries old, disappeared almost overnight. Borders drawn by rulers on maps cut through tribes, villages, and families, forcing people into new countries that had no meaning to them. Languages, cultures, and traditions were trapped behind invisible lines. And here's the most striking part. Those borders drawn in 1884 and 1885 Many of them remain today. Look at the map of Africa. Notice the straight lines cutting across deserts and forests. They are not natural. They are Berlin scars. The scramble for Africa was not just about land. It was about control, resources, and power. It left wounds that nations are still healing from today. And yet, despite all of this, Africa's story did not end there. The same continent divided on paper rose up decades later, fighting for independence, reclaiming its voice, and rewriting its destiny. So the question is, why does this history matter now? Because when we see Africa today, its struggles, its borders, and even its unity, we are still seeing echoes of that cold Berlin winter in 1884. And if you've stayed with me this far, then you know the truth. African history is too important to be forgotten, too powerful to be ignored. And here on Echoes Africa, that's what we do. We uncover the stories the world tried to bury. So, if you want to keep exploring the mysteries, the forgotten kingdoms, and the untold truths of Africa, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't just watch history. Be part of bringing it back to life, because the story doesn't end here. And trust me, the next one is even deeper.